He's a Georgetown University professor whose latest book is What the Truth Sounds Like. RFK, James Baldwin, and our unfinished conversation about race in America. Michael Eric Dyson. My man. There he is. How are you?
Good, my dear brother.
How you doing, Professor? Look at that.
How you doing? Hey.
You still profess, right?
I still profess.
What is it like for the kids to have such a star in their room? Are they starstruck?
Oh, man. You know, when you come to class,
No.
they're, you know what, they do say, my mother told me to come take your class, or my grandma's a fan of yours. I said, but not you. That's good.
I get a little of that, too.
Right.
So your book is so fascinating because, and you write so beautifully. It reads like a
man.
novel always.
Thank
You're
you, brother.
unbelievable. But what attracted you to this particular moment? Because I was not aware of this meeting that sort of starts your book off about Robert F. Kennedy, whose passing was 50 years ago this week.
That's right, yeah.
And he had a meeting in 1963. He wanted to meet the black leaders who he wanted to hear really who blacks listened to.
That's right.
So it was Harry Belafonte, right?
Right.
It was who? Lena Horne.
Lena Horne,
James
Lorraine
Baldwin.
James Baldwin, Lorraine Hansberry. And he admitted, and I love how you start, that I didn't know about that meeting. That's the work of an author, right? To bring a story that very few people know about, or if they do, it's episodic. Read a couple pages here, a paragraph there. But I was curious about it, and I said, boy, I want to read a book about it. I couldn't find one, and I said, let me write it myself. And this meeting was extraordinary because he being Bobby Kennedy, who was then the United States Attorney General. His brother was the president. And he said, look, I see a crisis brewing in urban America. There's a lot of rage going on here. People are attracted to the extremist groups, and they're turning away from Martin Luther King Jr. or Whitney Young, head of the Urban League, or Roy Wilkins, who's head of the NAACP. But I don't want to talk to the politicians, to Adam Clayton Powell or King as a leader. I want to talk to, as you said, the black people who have the ear of black America. He met with Baldwin at a breakfast meeting out at Hickory Hill, his place out in Virginia. Baldwin's plane was late. They didn't talk for about a half an hour. He says, look, the next day I'm going to be in, New York. Why don't you bring a few of your friends, if you can gather them up, and come on over to the house. And when you're James Baldwin, your friends are Harry Belafonte, Lena Horne, and Lorraine Hansberry.
He really wanted to, Bobby Kennedy wanted to know, what's the dilly?
I mean, what's going on with black America?
Right.
And
at least he asked.
Look, contrasting what we have now, that's a huge benefit and advantage in this country, because he was actually curious. And when he got to the meeting, let's be honest, though, he's a politician, so he wants them to be grateful. Be grateful for what we've done, me and my brother. But his brother, John Kennedy, was an extraordinary politician, but he was playing both ends against the middle. He was putting on the bench people like Harold Cox, who was a right-wing bigot in his spirit, and allegedly a liberal, but he's calling people horrible names from the bench. He's also, telling the governor of Georgia, when he placed a well-timed call to Martin Luther King Jr.'s imprisoner there, that, look, you let him out of jail. He let King out of jail. And then a few days later, there was an election, and all the black people who could vote voted for him. But he told that governor, we will not use federal forces to support integration when I come into office. Then he's telling black people, hey, I'm going to support the civil rights movement. So he was caught in between that, and Bobby Kennedy thought,
So Bobby Kennedy got an earful.
He got an earful.
Isn't that the end of the story?
Oh, let me tell you what. Yeah. He thought it was going to be gratitude. They said, nah, not really. We're not here for that. And they gave him, for lack of a better word, hell. And they really gave it to him hard. A young man was there named Robert Smith, Jerome Smith, I'm sorry, and he was a CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. He was one of their freedom riders. Next to John Lewis, nobody was beaten more than this man. And he cut to the chase. I'm not here for your BS. I'm tired of all this talk you're doing, this party pity-patter. Stop it. Bobby Kennedy was shocked. And then when James Baldwin said, well, wouldn't you go asking this young Mr. Smith, trying to ratchet it up? He said, would you go to your to fight for your country? He said, never. Bobby Kennedy was upset. From there, it got worse. Lena Horne said, don't turn to us respectable Negroes. Keep talking to that man, because that's who you need to listen to. And for 3 hours, they lit him up and gave him a new perspective. He got pissed. He sicked the FBI on them. He got the dossiers of many of these people who were there, including Clarence Jones, who was the lawyer for both Baldwin and Martin Luther King Jr. But then he calmed down. And then he said, if I were black, I'd be pissed too. I'd be full of rage too. And then he started telling his brother, start speaking about race as a moral issue, not just a political one. And then he, in his own life, began to change and had a lot more compassion and insight about the nature of black suffering. He thought that the black people there that night were too emphatic on witness, personal storytelling, rather than public policy. But what he discovered is they understood that public policy, without dealing with the anti-blackness that was afoot in the land, would never do enough. So it was a tremendous meeting.
I wonder today if policy even matters to black or white. I mean, I see the things that Trump is doing. He has Kanye to the White House.
Right.
Today he was talking about maybe lifting the ban on the federal illegality of marijuana.
Right, I saw that.
He pardons, I forget her name, but the
Alice Marie Johnson?
Yes, you know, and people are going to watch TV and they're going to see grateful black folks. Thank you, President.
Right.
This anecdotal way. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes up in the polls.
Oh, sure. I mean,
he's a master manipulator.
It's shrewd. But the problem is this. You know, and as he challenged the football players, you know, tell me the people that you think need to be pardoned and I'll pardon them. Well, that individual approach doesn't deal with system, doesn't deal with structure. There are too many people. You don't know their names because they're nameless and faceless to you. There are a bunch of people that you continue to consign to the dustbin of history and you don't think about them. Instead of pardoning some dead black people, how about some living ones who are here now? And
well, he did.
Well, there was Alice Marie.
Yes.
But you can't do it individually on a case-by-case basis. The system itself is producing the corruption and inequality.
But again, we live in a country where not everyone is a professor.
Right. I understand that.
So everything you just said was what?
Yeah.
He let this beautiful black lady go. Obama didn't do that.
Well, that's true.
He was in jail all that time. I mean, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
That he's just wily enough that could make you popular. Legalizing pot. He could do that tomorrow.
Oh,
he'd do it just to piss off Jeff Sessions.
Right, of course.
And he'd get a lot, black and white. I'd be his biggest fan for a day.
Well, look,
pardons. He could pardon.
If he pardoned my brother who's been in prison for 29 years, I'd say, hey, that was a good thing.
Right.
But here's the point. If what we do is get seduced by the belief that it's an individual thing and not a systematic thing,
I agree with you.
The problem is that you pick and choose, you cherry pick. I like this person. If you happen to know Kanye West, if you happen to know Kim Kardashian, if you happen to know somebody famous who can advocate for you, the problem is those who have nobody to speak for them. That's why you got to talk up for them. I got to speak up for them. In fact, I'm part of the alt-right. Ought to do the right thing. Ought to do it time and time again.
I thought it was very eye-opening in your book when you wrote about Bernie Sanders and Trump.
Right.
That, you know, most people think of those two as opposites.
Yeah.
And you see a lot more of a connection.
Yeah, they're both older white men who are cantankerous.
Hey. Nothing wrong with older white cantankerous men.
Well, and one is attracted to, of course, to rhetorical fluency. The other one can barely speak. But that aside, right? I mean, one is a butthurt, brain-dead bigot. The other one is an insightful critic of things. But they're both older white guys who were slow to understand what race was about in America. And after Trump was elected, even Bernie Sanders said, you know, we got to do something about this identity politics. It's all right to deal with women. It's all right to deal with African Americans and Latinos. But let's get back to the politics. From where? The point is that white is an identity, too. And what Bernie Sanders didn't understand, if you subsume race under class, in other words, you think class is the big deal, race is something that's a consequence of that, you're missing out on the fact that even poor white people sometimes are bigoted against poor black people. It's not like class overcomes those differences. They want the Latinos out. They don't want black people in their pipe fitter unions or becoming police people and firemen. So the point is that class has to always be intersected with race and gender and sexuality. And Bernie Sanders was slow to that. So I saw them as mirror images of the same kind of figure. I'm not saying that Bernie Sanders is Donald Trump in terms of ideology, but certainly in terms of approach and ignorance about race. But at least he's trying to educate himself in a way that Donald Trump is allergic to.
Well, we could all educate ourselves better with your book. Thank you, Michael. Michael Eric Dyson, my good friend. Thank you, Mike.